Hi, it's Colin Coward. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
This was as close to a must-win as you could possibly imagine for this team. They had more than enough personnel available to win the game handily. And not only did they lose, but they actively sabotaged themselves, which is something that has been a very persistent problem throughout the entire season. It's like that coach from the Arizona Cardinals after that famous Monday Night Football loss. They are who we thought they were. When a team tells you everything they are about themselves over a massive, massive sample size, it's unrealistic to expect them to change. And a lot of that's on me. If you guys remember, I last night laid out the case for how a Lakers play-in berth could realistically happen and how they could use that berth to potentially make some noise in a playoff run. And I explained to you guys using one stat that they actually had a better punch than they've shown for most of the season. I pointed out that in 184 minutes this season coming into tonight, with LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook on the floor, with no center, they were plus 11.4 net, meaning they were outscoring teams by 11.5 points per 100 possessions. But there was a very important stat that I threw out before that, if you guys remember. I said there are some bad LeBron and AD stats. And I told you that this season, coming into tonight, when the Lakers had LeBron and Anthony Davis on the floor together, they had a negative net rating, and one that was worse than they were last year with LeBron and AD on the bench at the same time. So that's how bad they've been this season with LeBron and AD on the floor. So what's the difference between those two scenarios? Why are LeBron, AD, and Russ with no center playing relatively well? And why are LeBron and AD in general, in the totality of their minutes, playing so poorly? And the obvious reason why was throughout the entire season, the Lakers either forced by injury at various points or simply because of malpractice from the coaching staff, they very frequently played their worst players alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Basketball, coaches have coaches have a philosophy that they bring to a situation. Frank Vogel has a core philosophy, right? And it centers around controlling the interior as a defensive team, shutting off the paint, but also rebounding, controlling the glass. It's all about physical dominance. And with the 2020 Lakers, that worked. That's why I've been so defensive of Frank Vogel over this entire span. But the league has changed a lot in the last 2 years. And that particular team was so skilled down the roster. When you really looked at all the players they had in their rotation, Alex Caruso, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, that was a better version of Dwight Howard. JaVale McGee is a much better backup center than anybody they had that season. He was actually starting. That team was significantly more talented. This team is not so much. So you can't afford to play away from your strengths. And the concept. It's like the concept of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is seeing something when you have a specific worldview, you're going to gravitate towards data and you're going to gravitate towards evidence that confirms your belief. We have had so much evidence this year that this team is at their best when Anthony Davis is at the center position and they play their younger players, when they play Austin Reeves, when they play Stanley Johnson, when they play Malik Monk alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis. That is when this team has been at its best. And there's been significant data to back that up. But Frank Vogel has consistently ignored that data. I told you guys after they beat the Jazz earlier this season, they beat the Jazz, they run them off the floor. It's that Stanley Johnson, LeBron pick and roll at the end of the game. And there was an amazing lineup that finished that game. It was Austin Reeves, Malik Monk, Stanley Johnson, LeBron, and I believe it might have been Taylor, and I can't remember who the fifth guy was. But they had a core lineup that controlled that game in the fourth quarter. Frank did not play that lineup a single minute the next game. Not a single minute. So he had data right there in his face, proof that what he was doing was working with that group. And he completely ignored it and went back to what he was comfortable with in the next game. That's confirmation bias. That's seeing two sets of data, a data that goes against your worldview and data that goes towards your worldview, and ignoring the data, the clear and obvious data that goes against your worldview. Frank doesn't like to play this way. Frank doesn't want to play Anthony Davis at center. He loves having two bigs on the floor. He wants to play traditional, old school, plotting basketball. That's what he wants to do. He wants to live in the half court and play like he did with Roy Hibbert in the Indiana Pacers, which worked back in the day. This is a completely different league now. His worldview is inherently flawed for this NBA in the year 2022. So here we go. Fast forward to today. Like I point out, 183 minutes. LeBron AD, no center, plus 11.4. LeBron AD in totality, negative. So obviously, that's the way they need to play. LeBron and AD at center. But in that first half tonight, you played 24 minutes of basketball. By my count, they played about 3 minutes and 14 seconds with LeBron and AD and no center with Russ. 3 minutes and 14 seconds out of 28 available. So all of the data in the world, all of the success in the world, screaming that you need to play this way, but Frank wants to play his way. And obviously, towards the end of the game, there was a point about 7.5 minutes left in the third quarter where Frank did finally go. He took Dwight out of the game. He played LeBron, AD, and Russ without a center. Bingo, bango. They went on a run right away. LeBron was just getting to the basket every single time down the floor. I have a big feeling that LeBron and AD they look like themselves for the most part tonight, right? But the context here is neither of them has played consistently of late. So their conditioning wasn't there. This was a game you had to win early. This was a game you had to avoid crunch time at all costs, because you knew that the longer the game dragged on, the longer it was competitive, the more likely LeBron and AD's rust in conditioning would become a problem, and it did. LeBron fired off everything he had in the tank in that third quarter. Had absolutely no lift in the fourth. Don't think it was the ankle. I think it was fatigue. It's completely unrealistic to expect him to take a bunch of time off like that and then to just walk back onto a basketball court and be able to play 40 minutes of high-level NBA basketball. That's unrealistic. This was a game where you had to come in and play to your strengths and close the deal early. But instead it was close. And what do I always tell you guys? If a game is close at the end, literally anything can happen. I remember watching a game in the bubble in 2020, and I watched DJ Augustine of the Orlando Magic personally execute the Milwaukee Bucks with a couple of big shots at the end of the game because they played with their food all night. They ended up winning the next 4 games and won the series, but I can't tell you how many times in my time watching basketball I've seen a team play with their food for whatever reason. Usually it's just effort related. The Lakers actively sabotage themselves with strategy. But you find yourself in a close game. There's 8 minutes left and anything can happen. So guess what happens? Jonas Valanciunas makes a weird lurching 3 from the top of the key, because that's the kind of thing that can happen in a close game. There is a play where Jonas Valanciunas posts up Anthony Davis and uses his off arm to clear space for the shot and gets a foul call. I thought it was a really bad call. But guess what happens in really close games sometimes? Really bad calls. It's part of the deal. There were some really good looks that people missed at the end of the game for the Lakers. What happens when you're in a close game? Sometimes you miss shots. This just happened last week. Or it might have been a week ago. It might have been 2 weeks ago against Washington. Played with their food. Blew a lead. It was close. Next thing you know, LeBron was missing a wide open 3 at the end. Russ missed a wide open 3, and they got killed by Kristaps Porzingis making contested jump shots. Because that's what happens when you mess around with a team and get into a close game. This is a team. I told you guys yesterday, if LeBron and AD really were engaged, which I thought they were tonight, but there was no reason in the world why they shouldn't go 5-1 down the stretch, because they are, even with all of the issues surrounding the two of them on the roster this year, they're good enough to win these games. They're good enough to beat the Nuggets. They're good enough to beat Golden State if Steph Curry's hurt. They're good enough to beat everybody remaining on their schedule but the Suns. That's how good they are. They're good enough to go out tonight and have the Pelicans down 85 to 68 going into the fourth quarter, to where LeBron and AD could run out of gas and be fatigued and it could not be a problem. But instead, they played with their food. And instead, Frank went right. This is ridiculous. So, first of all, the starters. I've told you guys all season, I've done videos on it. I've done breakdowns. I've shown you guys numbers. I've shown you everything that I can to show that the best players on the roster were Austin Reeves, Stanley Johnson, Malik Monk, and Talen Horton-Tucker, alongside LeBron and AD. Austin Reeves didn't play tonight. I get it. He hadn't played super well in the previous few games. But if you know anything about the game of basketball, you know guys like Austin Reeves, glue guys who are fifth men in lineups, they require talent alongside them to get them the easy opportunities that they capitalize on. Austin Reeves was always going to look worse with LeBron and AD off the floor. He's not a guy that can create a ton of things for himself against set defenses. He's not a guy who's going to thrive if he's being guarded all the time. He was going to play a lot better with LeBron and AD coming back. There was no reason in the world to play Avery Bradley over him tonight. That is a completely unconscionable decision. There is no defense for it.